Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another installment of the Taylor Geospatial Career Guide series. My name is Christopher Michael, the Taylor Geospatial Institute. I'm so glad to have you with us today for the next in a series of webinars we created with a very specific purpose: to expose people curious about geospatial careers to successful geospatial professionals. This Career Guide series is designed to share the firsthand experiences of people who make up our geospatial community. Why did they get into geospatial? How did they learn? And what lessons did they learn in their career that might help you in your career? Today's session features Adam Zitello, an intelligence officer and technology advocate with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Adam serves as Foundational Geospatial Intelligence, or GEOINT, mission owner, and is responsible for directing all NGA investments in technology needed to create, manage, and distribute Foundation GEOINT. Adam, thanks so much for being here today.
Christopher, happy to be here. Hopefully we'll keep it interesting, keep you engaged, all.
Let's try to do it. So for Adam, you, and for everyone else, here's how this is going to work. The first 20 or 30 minutes of the session will feature Adam answering questions and conversations with me. After that, we'll open things up for our online participants to ask Adam questions of their own. So please feel free during this part of our conversation to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar. Later on, as we get into the Q&A session, we'll have that option for you folks to go ahead and live screen as well. So if you want to live screen a question, just raise your hand and we'll do that too. So let's get started, Adam. First question. Tell us a little bit about your organization and what you do there.
Yeah, Christopher, thank you. You read my bio, I think, so I won't repeat any of that. But to say NGA, I'll use NGA, but the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is it's a unique blend of, I guess, support to the intelligence community. So we wear two hats in essence, right? NGA does. We're an intelligence community agency, but we're also a combat support agency to the Department of Defense, right? And so our primary currency is this thing we call GEOINT, right? Geospatial intelligence. And at its core, that's geospatial data and products, right? So GEOINT might be a term you're unfamiliar with, but insert or use the word geospatial kind of interchangeably, and you'll be just fine on this conversation. What does NGA do? We do a wide range of things, right, in the geospatial realm. But at its core, we enable the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, the U.S. policymaker to really get after the president's national security priorities and, to keep it simple, keep Americans safe at home and abroad. That's NGA, right? In a nutshell, what is GEOINT, right? Anybody who sails a ship, flies an aircraft, uses GPS, for instance, is in some way interacting with an NGA outcome, right? NGA is about 15,000 people strong, and that includes civilians, active duty military, reserve military, contractors, and we're in we have a global footprint, but our headquarters is just outside of Washington, D.C. in a place called Springfield, Virginia. But we do keep what I'll refer to as a secondary headquarters, since I sit in St. Louis myself, in downtown St. Louis in Arnold, Missouri, right? So we keep those as our flagpoles, if you would. And then we place and we deploy NGA bodies dozens of places around the globe, both in and outside of combat zones, at combatant commands in Europe and Asia. So that's kind of NGA in a nutshell. You probably can find more on the internet more eloquently than that. But my role and my current job, right, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit, that at NGA you're really expected to move around. But my current position at the moment is this mission owner for a thing called Foundation GEOINT. And Foundation GEOINT is essentially the data, products, services that describe the physical and cultural characteristics of the Earth, and to a greater and increasing degree, even the space domain. So if you think about charts on a vessel bridge, if you think about maps in a Humvee somewhere, that's NGA, right? We make those things, and that's Foundation GEOINT specifically. And so what do I do personally? some not so exciting. But in a nutshell, there I manage the broad technology portfolio for all of these sort of mapping, charting, and geodesy functions that NGA does, and basically deliver tools to about 1,000, 2,000 analysts and scientists so that they can create foundation geo and deliver to their customers. Really, really wave top stuff.
No, I think that's really instructive, especially for the participants who may not know too much about NGA. So thanks for sharing that with us, Adam.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Your job, as it is with NGA, is specific to the United States government. So can you share a little bit about what makes maybe pursuing a geospatial career in the Fed a little bit different from pursuing it in the private sector? Do you have any private sector experience prior to joining NGA, and maybe talk about the balance between those two things?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. This is a good question. I like this one because probably a lot of folks on this are thinking about which direction to go. So I would say a couple of things. First, private public sector in the geospatial realm shares more in common than it has different, right? These jobs are very similar. They have different aspects, but in the end, you're a geospatial person. You're a geospatial person. You're in the club. You're part of the community. We're all one and the same. I sort of think about two really big differences. If you go down the route of public sector versus private sector, and I should probably say off the top, this is not a lifelong decision. You can, and many do, go back and forth. You may start in the public sector and end in the private sector. You may start in the private sector, come public, and go back private. Right? This is a long decision. Nobody's asked you to chisel anything into stone. But probably as you navigate this, I would think about it well in two ways, right? Federal government hires for a lifetime, right? We make 30 plus year commitments to our hires. Once you're on board, presuming you are performing, you stay on board, right? And so what does that really mean? Imagine that you are hired for life. Now you could imagine that we don't know what we need 20 years from now. So often what we're doing is we're developing our staff, right, in-house. So you come on board, you have a trade craft, maybe 10 years, your trade craft needs to develop. We do that in-house, right? We do a lot of in-house training, right? We send you out of house. And I can give you a little anecdote about how I've done that in my career. But that's probably the first big difference. The other one is in the federal space, you're on the receiving side of a lot of techniques and technology, right? We're not necessarily the ones developing the algorithms, developing the tools, right? We partner with academia, we partner with the commercial space so that they're out there innovating on these tools. They understand our problem set, right? They innovate on the tools and then they bring them back to us. Our jobs in the federal government are, if you're in the geospatial space, and I would say this is true inside and outside of DoD because I've had jobs in both. Our job is to apply those tools and techniques, those geospatial tools and techniques, right? And sometimes that's true in the private sector, but it's always true in the public sector. So I said I'd come maybe circle back. I have been a lifelong federal employee, right? That was my design. That's all I've ever wanted to be. Maybe that's all I'll ever be. I don't know, right? I'm not old enough to say that I can see the light at the end of any retirement tunnels. 2 years ago, I'll just kind of give you an anecdote. I put in and was picked up for what we call a national security fellowship at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So NGA picks me up and puts me down in Cambridge, Massachusetts for a year to learn alongside and from some of the brightest minds in America, well, in the world, I would argue. All paid for by NGA with the expectation that, I am an aspiring leader, that they expect that I will need retooled about midway through my career as I am to, what I once was a GIS analyst. I'm moving now into leadership roles and I'm moving from sort of tactical and operational activities to more strategic thinking. NGA desired to retool me. And I, was thankful that I got picked up to do that and spent a year at Harvard University with graduate students. My beard's a little grayer than most of the graduate students that were there, and probably those on this call. But I enjoyed learning alongside of some really bright people and bring that back to NGA. And that's kind of one example of something that the public sector is going to offer you that the private sector might expect you to go do on your own, right? Acquire those skills on your own.
No, that's a fascinating description. And James Galley has beat me to it. It actually has gone to my question that which I was going to ask. So I'll just go ahead and read James's. So Adam, I was curious how you got to the position you are in today and what past experiences have inspired you and led you on the pathway to what is you're currently on. So can you track it to a particular moment or realization?
No, no. I'm just before I'm unequivocal about this. Like, look, I never desired a job in the geospatial space, right? I didn't think about it that way, right? In fact, I right there was no aha moment. Let's just say it that way. I thought, right, I was certain by the time I was a senior in high school that I was going to be a marine biologist, right? I know that's sort of, everybody says that, right? Not everybody, but a lot of people have said that in their life. I was on that path, right? I went to my undergraduate in marine sciences. I got a graduate degree in marine sciences. My first job out of college was a graduate fellow at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, you might know it as. It's the oceans and weather people. And I was, my path was playing out exactly how I thought it would. A couple years in, it wasn't as fulfilling as I'd always imagined it would be, right? And in fact, I worked with a gentleman who had just applied to NGA, and he said, "Hey, man, just throw your application in with these NGA guys." I don't know who NGA is. I wasn't even thinking about it. I'm living in Washington D.C. at the time, so I figured, it just changes my commute by 10 minutes, no big thing. And I applied, and the position was ultimately offered to me, and I took it, and that was 15 years ago. So what was the path there? I don't know. Like, let me just kind of draw a through line for you. The one commonality in all of this is I was a geospatial guy, right? I, as a marine scientist, I didn't identify as a geospatial person. I identified as a marine scientist, a coral ecologist. That's what I was doing. That's what I imagined I would do. But I had the skill, and I had a skill that allowed me to pivot, right? And that was GIS, remote sensing at the time, right? To say that I went down the geospatial path, well, I don't know. It's not the way that I went, but because I had this skill that was required or needed by an agency like NGA as well as NOAA, which is the reason they hired me there. It allowed me to navigate to where I am kind of mid-career, and I couldn't be happier. And so, I mean, maybe if you made me think about it, Christopher, probably my undergraduate, I had to take an elective course in geography, right? A geography 101 class. And I took it, and I have never looked back. I enjoyed the class. I still remember the lab. I still remember the friends I met in the lab down in the basement of this building. And it's the GIS community. It's a small group of people, and I'm still very good friends with some of the people I sat next to in that class. And that's the moment, I guess, that shuttled me down this pathway to geospatial, I suppose.
No, that's a good description. I want to pull on the environmental sciences component a little bit. So can you talk a little bit about how maybe that environmental sciences background and start sort of provided opportunities or challenges to the career in intelligence and national security? I mean, I know you got into a little bit about the remote sensing component, but how did that sort of shift for you when you made that shift?
And I don't know, this is increasingly less the case, but 20 years ago, when I was kind of going through college, most GIS programs, most, were housed inside the sort of environmental and life sciences colleges. And that might be true for some of the folks on this call. So for me, it didn't handicap me to then become an intelligence analyst. In fact, for me, it was the core of what I was offering to NGA, right? I knew GIS, I knew remote sensing. I could apply it to some very difficult problems, right? Understanding coral habitat, maybe 50 feet underwater. That's pretty hard to do. It's pretty easy to understand the movement of vehicles on pavement in and around, pick your place in the world, right? So So what I would argue to you is it made me a much better intelligence officer in the geosphere, particularly, because I was tackling some really low data environments, really bad conditions for remote sensing, for Earth observation in many cases, but trying to make sense of the world, for me, underwater, right, from space. So I don't know. Maybe that answered your question, but it.
Oh, it did. And that's a fascinating description of it. So I want to shift from maybe the next question to a little bit to thinking about maybe you as the career person and job seeker to maybe you as the executive and leader. So as you start to think about hiring people at NGA or on your team and bringing in people into the organization for a geospatial career, how does the NGA think about hiring people for geospatial roles? What are some of the skills, some of the credentials or traits and attitudes that NGA really finds most important?
Yeah, Christopher, it's a good question. I was hoping we would get to this area, because presumably most of you aren't here to hear me drone on about my personal exploits, but you're interested in how maybe you would get into a career, particularly with NGA. I'll say this at the top, right? I told you there's 14,000 some odd people at NGA. We do not apply a cookie cutter to hiring at NGA. We have a very broad range of skill sets that we require to execute our mission. And those skill sets change. They are evolving as we speak, right? We used to hire, and we still do to a lesser degree, subject area experts in the sense that they might be a Pashto or Farsi linguist, right? And we still hire those people. Or there might be somebody who deeply understands sort of Chinese politic, right? We still hire those folks. But what we are increasingly hiring are people with data skills, right? Insert any, I say that very generically. What is data skills, right? Data science, right? Data management, scripting, data visualization, all of these things. That's where we're headed as an organization, right? And I'll probably get a question about AI or ML and how that all plays in. And so I don't want to take away from that, but these are areas that we're developing in. So to track the broader geospatial industry, we're right along with that, right? But we don't look for, there isn't a credential that you have to walk away with, right? What's a marine scientist doing at NGA doing intelligence analysis? Well, it's the core skills, right? That's the kicker, right? It was what the coursework that I did, the application of those skills in the marine environment, that led me to this job and made me, I think, successful in competing to get the jobs. But I know that's probably an unsatisfying answer to most on the call, but there isn't a formula. It's just that simple. But if you really want to be on the cutting edge, I mean, I would argue that knowing your Python, right? Knowing again your Esri workflows, understanding OpenGeoIN, right? These aren't going to hurt you. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. And there's one question a little bit kind of leading into that in terms of masters and analytics programs and data analytics. Those types of job opportunities are out there, I'm assuming, with NGA.
Yeah. I was hired on with a master's degree, right? I would say the large majority of my colleagues were not hired on with a master's degree. They had undergraduate degrees. They maybe pursued a master's degree while in employment at NGA. And I might add, if I could throw a sales plug there, NGA paid for that in many cases. So just a little added benefit if you are an undergraduate and would seek a graduate degree, you could do that on NGA's dime. But yeah, I don't know if that answers that, but Christopher, maybe reframe, or did I miss it?
No, I think you touched on it, at least in terms of what kinds of programs folks go into. So when people start to think about going down that road of either trying to immerse themselves in a world of geospatial or pick up, knowledge or skills or cultivating a passion for it, curious if there are any particular resources that maybe you use, whether it's organizations or websites or software tools. You touched a little bit on software, but maybe even podcasts or books, anything that you think that maybe is underexposed or even underappreciated when it comes to people looking to get closer to a geospatial career. So are there things that you try to steer your young professionals towards or suggest that they try to dig more into?
So I will offer one that somebody offered to me while I was at Harvard. There is a startup media company called Payload, and I don't know if anybody tracks them, but for me, they've now become part of my daily routine. And they're like I said, a startup, right? Started about 2 years ago. Kind of their tagline, I think, is what is it? We cover the policy and business of space, right? And they have a podcast, they have a website with some long form journalism. But what I really like is the sort of, I don't know if you know Morning Brew, but it's like a morning delivery to my inbox of a 5 minute sort of read that gets me up to speed on what's going on in the space industry. And particularly, it's the new space industry, right? But new space, if you understand it, would be the kind of the emergence of a commercial space industry, remembering that space for the longest time was dominated by a few nation states funding a few really large prime aerospace companies. But new space is this explosion, this sort of Silicon Valley, LA, Denver explosion of space tech, right? Small satellites that fit into a shoebox, launch vehicles that are built with 3D printers. It's lowered the bar to space. And it might be really obvious why a geospatial guy is really interested in space, but just to kind of play it all out, new space, the commercial space economy is probably one of the largest disruptors in our industry, right? The explosion of Earth imaging, right, and the synthetic aperture radar, not just electro-optical, right, but infrared, all of these things. That's going to change how we at NGA do our business. It is already changing how we do our business. So if you want to get ahead of it, you need to really understand who's the next startup, who's bringing the next commercial LiDAR from space capability, right? And what's that going to look like? And how's that going to change your job as a geospatial, in this case, analyst, or, somebody who manages a portfolio? So I'll go all the way back to say, Payload's my thing, right? Somebody turned me on to it in one of my classes at the Harvard Business School and was like, you don't know what Payload is? How are you in the space class and you don't know? Well, all right, let me go check it out. And from that day on, I read it every morning.
It's a great resource, Adam. Thanks for sharing that one. I'll jump a little bit into Daniel's question and pair with one that I had teed up, which Daniel's asking a little bit about opportunities, what opportunities might be there for overseas postings. But I'm curious if you could touch on that, but also, you've spent substantial portions of your career overseas.
Yep.
What advice do you have for early career folks interested in exploring opportunities outside the U.S.?
So I love this question because it's one of the coolest things about NGA or DIA or CIA. Pick an intel agency, pick a DoD. Look, living overseas has been for me and my family, some of the greatest experiences, both professionally and personally. Full stop. Right. I would not have had that experience if I worked at NOAA. It's a domestic agency. You allude to it. I spent just recently 5 years in Germany supporting what is called AFRICOM, but the U.S. Africa Command. So it's the military, the 4-star command that manages all U.S. operations in Africa. And what NGA does is we place what we call an NGA support team or NGA forward at all of the combatant commands. Right, we embed our folks with the military services, both home, at home and abroad. And you're in what I would say is it's a little baby NGA. It has all the little pieces of NGA typically, all in one team inside of a partner footprint, right, or a consumer footprint. And to get there, NGA, you need to start at the core, right? You need to start in DC or you need to start in St. Louis. That's how we do it, right? You got to come there. You got to understand our business. You got to understand how broad and how different our different mission areas are. And then after a few years, you'll have the opportunity to what is essentially internal hiring, right? So we'll hire you into DC, we'll hire you into St. Louis, and then you, and this is what I love about NGA, are expected, in fact, to go get a new job, go somewhere else, right? I spent most of my career in DC. I now live in St. Louis. That's great. I'm expected to do that. I'm learning the agency every time I move to a new post. And part of that is living overseas, right? To understand how a combatant command, in my case, AFRICOM, uses GEOINT, right? There's no better way to understand the value of GEOINT than to hand it to the commander and have him take it, put it in his pocket, get on a jet, and fly down to Africa to actually guide his decision making with something you gave him 2 hours before. I mean, that's an amazing connection you would have between geospatial analysis and direct policy implications from something you did with your hand on your desktop with your mouse click. Amazing experience.
And it sounds like maybe you just addressed Tara's question, but I'll ask it anyway, because she's sort of alluding to what's the most rewarding job or experience in your career at NGA, and why do you keep showing up? Is it what you just described right there?
There's a lot to unpack there. I have enjoyed every assignment, right? Not every assignment is as enjoyable. I won't sugarcoat that, right? My favorite assignment was my second job in Germany, which was managing the team at AFRICOM, to essentially help the command, right? These are non-geospatial individuals. They are maybe a warfighter, there may be an intelligence professional outside of GEOINT, to help them think about their data with a geospatial bent, right? It might be logistics data. It might be medical supplies on the African continent, right? How do they visualize that? How do they analyze those data in it with a geospatial lens on? And in essence, I was leading a team that helped each of these different sort of components, directorates inside of the AFRICOM, understand their data and put it in a geospatial framework. And what we believe helped them make better decisions because they could see it on maps. They could visualize it in data, kind of the where part of the data. So I don't know if I've gone far afield on that, but that is certainly the most rewarding job that I've had. The second part of the question was what gets me up out of bed, and I think this is maybe the crux of the matter here. If anybody's listening, still, if I haven't bored everybody, what gets me up out of bed is being a public servant, right? Like that's what I've always desired. Even when I was working at NOAA, I wanted to serve the American people, right? You know, I am a father of 2 young children, a husband. I'm gonna put on a little bit of cheese here, if you'll allow it, Christopher.
Absolutely. Please do.
I anticipate every day that what I'm doing allows my son and daughter to inherit a more prosperous America, right? I know that's cheesy, but that's absolutely why I get out of bed. Not every day is as awesome as every other day, right? But it's why I go to work, and it's why I chose federal service, right? And you could say you're impacting an American prosperity as a commercial entity. Couldn't agree with you more. But my pathway to that, right? My higher calling, what I would say, what I would argue to everybody on this call is go get a job where you're doing something bigger than yourself, right? Doesn't have to be federal service. It was for me, but go do something where it's not just about your personal gain, your personal brand. It's about what you're doing to ensure America, for our children and my children's prosperity. That's what I do. That's why I get out of bed. It's why I love my job.
Well, that's awesome. That's a great answer, Adam. And before we get there, the questions are rolling in, so keep it coming, folks. We appreciate that. Before we continue too much of a geospatial talk, what's something about you just as a person that makes you who you are and has nothing to do with geospatial or your work or your career at all?
Well, it's a good question. Maybe I should retread what I just said, honestly. I mean, I'm a dad. Like this, my, every decision we make in this household is about, my wife and my kids and me, right, together. And part of that is how I've made decisions in my career. Moving overseas is a very personal choice too, right? It's a career choice, but it's more of a personal choice. My wife had to be okay with taking a 4-month-old baby that we just had and uprooting that and moving my daughter to Germany. And so take work out of the picture. I'm just a dad. I coach my daughter's soccer team, right? These are the things I love about my job as well, because I'm at home. I work long, hard hours, but they're not too long. I still get home to see my daughter's basketball practice, right? And so that's, I guess that's at my core, right? Is I'm just a father and a dad, and a husband rather.
That's great, Adam. I think there's a lot of things that people can relate to with that on this one, especially myself. So
Yeah.
let's jump right in, maybe to a question that Zara has, a little bit about recruitment. So I have heard several recruit-like pitches saying it is not only hard for STEM majors NGA seeks, but I always struggle to conceptualize what the jobs people say humanities degrees will look like. So could you maybe give some examples beyond subject experts and languages, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I will say, when I came into the agency, Cesar, if this goes where you're not, where we want to go, if not, Christopher, you can redirect me. When I came into the agency, geoint analysis largely was formed by the marriage of two work roles, right? This thing called a geospatial analyst, which is what I was, and this thing called an imagery analyst, right? And so this is still largely true, though it's been sort of supercharged with a lot of the new data analytics tools we have. There's an imagery analyst who understands what's going on in the capture of one image, right? They can understand what they see with their eyes, and they capture as an observation. Then there's a guy or gal like me that sweeps in behind that sort of compiles and consolidates these sort of individual observations into sort of analytic trends, both in time and space. That, if I was like gisting the whole geoint analysis process, now it's way more complicated than that. I'm underselling this, but at the core, it's an imagery analyst and a geospatial analyst working together to understand what's new, what's changed on one image, and then extrapolating or sort of compiling years of data into critical trends. And those critical trends are what feed the intelligence reporting, the geoint reporting, that we then give to the intelligence community for them to then combine that with other intelligence disciplines, so that we as a community are writing holistic geoint or imagery, or rather intelligence analysis for policymakers to consume and inform their decision process. I don't know if that's too generic, but it's a day in the life of an analyst at NGA. And I don't know if there's a reattack on that, Christopher. If I missed something on it, please.
No, I think that's helpful. And if there's any additional follow-ups, please do shoot those in the chat. Now, you did anticipate an AI question, and we do have one here. Given the rapid advancement of LLMs and AI, how do you foresee these developments affecting career opportunities in the geospatial field? And maybe, what sort of roles or assignments at NGA might be interesting entry points for people interested in a career around AI?
Yeah, you have to ask this question, right? If you didn't ask this question, Christopher, you would not be thorough in this conversation. Large language models, look, it's already changed the world. Why would it not change what we're doing? It's absolutely changing what we're doing. I'll say this, right? To write an intelligence report, literally, pen to paper, this could be year or hours long process. In some days, or in some cases, it's a weeks long process, right? I could imagine a large language model writing that intelligence report, if the data was in the condition it needed to be in a matter of minutes, right? Because what is our advantage? In a great power, global power competition, everybody's going to have data, right? It's who makes sense of their data fastest and delivers a coherent message to a policymaker or to a commander to change their approach on the battlefield, right? Large language models or computer vision, right? Let's talk a little bit about computer vision. And we have a program called Maven at NGA, which I won't talk about here because it would be beyond my depth. But we used to read images with eyeballs, right? Wet film, dropping down, reading imagery, saying what we see, right? A computer can do that now. And we have to, and we are leveraging the computer's ability to discriminate one tank variant from another in time and space. And so I'm kind of staying very high level on this intentionally, but you can imagine that AI, ML, computer vision, the like, large language models, all of this is revolutionizing the GUN field. And if you are going to bring value to NGA to bring it all the way back around to say, what do I do if I'm this? If you can understand how a large language model is constructed, right, and how to apply a large language model to analysis, to writing, as I gave you a vignette there, writing of an intelligence report. Well, then you're delivering great value to maybe somebody who's more in a leadership role who at this point is too far removed. We require your new and fresh techniques coming out of academia, coming out of the commercial sector, for us to apply those to our problem sets, right? So I understand the problem really well, and I'm pursuing technology solutions to get after that problem. But we have to have somebody's, plural, people ready to take the technology that I will go scare up from a partner and bring into the building for you to execute on our analysis or our mapping and charting mission. So I don't know if that helped.
Oh, I think that's a great touch on at least the question that was asked about AI, and a real sort of simple question leading into that one is Nathan's question on, does NGA consider mid-career candidates?
Absolutely. 100%. We have what is called a pay banded structure. I will not bore anybody with the details of this, but we 100% are pursuing mid-career. I know of one who lives down the street from me who was applying, right? She's a data scientist. She has spent 20 years in a career and lives in St. Louis and was curious, saw the value and the impact of GeoInt and GIS and geospatial on her community in St. Louis. And she was asking questions. How could I be a part of this? How can I join Team NGA to, be a part of what is a local movement, I think, right? And TGI is a very good example of that local movement. Because again, mid-career folks, which I think I'm one, have a very different perspective and have an offer quite a great deal in a very different way, and just as important to maybe the 22-year-old coming out of college. But there is value in both. And NGA is a very big tent. We have a lot of staff and we have a lot of mission. So yeah, absolutely mid-career is I would recommend it. Yeah.
That's a great personal connection to that story too. So thanks for sharing that, Adam.
Yeah.
One question from Andy Deering. It says, Adam, great to see you. Sounds like maybe he knows.
Andy.
Question: if you were to talk with a 7th grader in St. Louis about geospatial opportunities, how would you position your work and career to encourage more of that youth entering into the field? So 7th grader, K through 8.
Andy, I love this question, and it's one that I don't think enough about. Damn, I leave it to Andy to ask a really tough question, and I appreciate that. My daughter is in. I'll just again make this personal to me. My daughter's a 2nd grader. And if she would design or desire to pursue geospatial, I would be ecstatic, obviously. But I mean, what is at the core of geospatial moving forward? A lot of computer science, right? A lot of computer literacy that when you and I probably started this was not even particularly mature. But how would I engage? Gosh, Andy, that's a great question. I mean, particularly if they're local, I want to make the connection for them that St. Louis here, and sorry if you're not from St. Louis, but to make the connection that's the future, right? Part of the future is this thing geospatial, If you want to be at home, you want to make an impact locally, right? Go ahead and try to understand what geospatial is all about, because you might find it very interesting. I don't know. I have to think about this one. I love that question so much that it's like vexing me. It's like breaking my brain right now, Andy.
Well,
Um,
well, he broke you, Adam. That's okay. We'll give you a second to come back if you need to. But we can jump to more questions flowing in. So thanks.
yeah, let me, as I talk, I'll think about that one.
Uh,
And I'm
so,
gonna
so
email you, Andy, when I come up with a good answer.
so James has a question. How diverse are the projects you have worked on, and how many different projects have you worked on? Do you even really have a number? And do you essentially get to choose some of the projects you work on, or are all of them assigned to you?
I'll spin that a little bit differently, right? I will use a different word. I'll use position, right? Projects, within your position, you might work on many projects, maybe concurrently, right? A position is usually maybe 1, 2, 3 years you're in a position, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. I myself have had, you know, geez, probably at least 5, 6 different positions at NGA, right? Within a position, you might be on something that we call the analysis side, right? You might be on something called what we call the source side. I'm on the source side right now, the foundation GUN side. The kind of work you will do is it's always geospatial, but it's very distinct and different, right? My outcomes right now, if I were working in as an analyst in the source side of the house, are really about cartographic outcomes. They're really about visualization outcomes. Again, that mapping, charting part. If you're working on a geodesy team, you might be mapping the Earth's gravitational model, right? That would be a position you would do. Typically, we hire very specific scientists to do a job like that, but nevertheless, if you were on the analysis side of the house, you would be maybe assigned to a counter proliferation, right? Like understanding bad actors in the world that are proliferating weapons of mass destruction or something of that nature, right? So you might have that job for 3 years, right? So, personal anecdote, I spent a large portion of my analytic career working in the Middle East, Arabian Peninsula specifically. So, maybe in that type of job, they're not so much projects, but they're analytic lines of pursuit, right? So it's really understanding what might be going on between the Saudis and the Yemenis in along their border region, right? And really understanding that with depth and with data. That's a very different than what I described with our mapping, charting, or geodesy missions, right? So I favor and had always favored in my career moving between these different positions, right? These different approaches to using, again, the core is always the same. It's using geospatial to solve a problem or to understand something we don't well understand. And you can be the expert for 10 years on Chinese mobile missiles if you desire, or 20 years. Or you can do as I've done, and this is what I love about NGA. You make that choice. And so what you ultimately end up doing is once you're hired into NGA, you're part of the club. You then have opportunity to apply internally between these different positions, right? So you might spend 2 years doing one thing, and you might see something on what is basically an open website that suggests, hey, we have all these open jobs. Well, that sounds really interesting. How I've navigated my NGA career, looking for cool places to live and cool problems to solve.
That's great. So now I want to take a question for myself. There's been so many in the chat box, but one more for you, Adam, and a final reminder to folks, submit your questions for the Q&A. We have about 15 more minutes here with Adam. So before we get to those questions, a question here today, as you've been doing what you're doing already, which is sharing your firsthand knowledge about the things that you got where you are in your career. So I'd love for you to think about and share maybe something you've learned the hard way that you'd like people listening today to learn the easy way from you. So they don't really have to learn it the hard ways themselves. Do you have an example or anything you might be able to share from one of those insights?
How about I think about this two ways, right? Let me give you a general one. First is this, right? This is a very personal experience. As you've heard my sort of career schizophrenia so far, the career pursuit is a journey, not a destination. Allow the cliche, but just because it makes sense, right? It, Having a 10, 20-year career plan is a wonderful idea. Great. But absolutely don't beat yourself up about it, right? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because if you would ask me 20 years ago, what would I be doing? Where would I be living? Nothing of what I would tell you today is what I would have told you in that plan. Zero, right? Zero. Even the geospatial part would not have been in that plan. Allow yourself to enjoy the journey is, I guess, maybe where I would go with this, right? Um, be open-minded and be willing to experiment in your career, and you'll never be disappointed, because there's always enough problems in the world to solve, and they may not even be related, but it is just to say, like, enjoy the journey, right? Don't go looking to hit certain milestones across the way. So maybe that's a really general one. Maybe something more specific, right? And this will probably be the closest thing to a hot take I'm going to offer in this whole session, right? And your college professors may not be happy with it, but prioritize real tangible skills over pursuit of just general knowledge, right? Let me break that down a little bit, right? As a marine scientist, I can tell you all kinds of really useless facts, unless maybe we're doing trivia tonight, about ocean currents, the health of coral systems, right? How fish feed on and off coral ecosystems, right? If you're the expert, if you're going to be an expert in coral ecology, that's wonderful information to know. But if you, like me, desire to move a bit in your career, NGA didn't hire me because I knew coral ecology. NGA hired me because I had some very specific, intangible skills that I could sit down on a computer and execute against a wide variety of problem sets. And at that time, it was remote sensing and GIS. So I don't know, maybe that wasn't a hot take, but I would offer to you, prioritize. If you're in class, if you have some professional money that the professional development money that maybe your employer allows, go get real skills instead of just the generic knowledge of the world. Maybe people would take issue with that. I'll allow it. But that's what I think. That's what's allowed me to pivot multiple times in my career upon, because I had something very specific I could do to offer to an employer. It's frankly, as I said, what helped me land this job at NGA. Without those skills, NGA was not interested in a marine scientist.
That's fantastic advice, Adams. And it touched a little bit on what James is asking, almost on the reverse end. So any recommended skills from outside of your technical sphere that have been useful to you in your career? So not the Pythons in the world, but what are other skills outside of the technical realm?
If you'll allow this, I don't know if like project program management is a non-technical skill. I believe it's a non-technical skill. I believe that it's probably one of the most valuable. Again, I'll call it a soft skill. PMI would be angry if I said that. It's been one of the most valuable things for my career and in staff that I work with, people that I'm hiring. Understanding how to connect human beings, how to manage a budget, how to manage a vision, how to break that into specific chunks that can be achieved, all the things that are really good project program management is absolutely critical and can be attained outside of academia. You can do this through professional degree or professional development pursuits, online, in person, all of that. So it's a quick hitter, but for me, that's the one that just boom, just jumps out for me.
That's cool. Well, shifting gears just slightly, an anonymous question. Can you touch on how human geography plays into geospatial and imagery analysis? I know you're a marine biologist, so a little bit about human geography and how that plays into it.
So somebody might be throwing me a softball that I know, but so in one of the positions, as I described, many positions. One was the senior analyst for what was at that time in NGA at developing tradecraft this thing called human geography. So I spent a couple years actually building out tradecraft that we would use at NGA to do human geography, myself and others, a team. Um, I mean, human geography is indispensable. It is the it is the fabric that we lay all of our physical features on in our GIS, right? I'm thinking layering, right? To understand, especially in a more complex in a more complex battle space that we were in some of these sort of Afghanistan, Iraq, some of these environments, understanding who lived inside of the physical space that we were mapping, I believe, made all the difference in the world, right? So NGA does, and we put this in the sort of what we call the source directorate. We put human geography there, but it is one of the disciplines at NGA that really cross cuts between our mapping and charting as well as our analytic fields. Everybody has an interest, but very few can effectively achieve it. And there's a lot of reasons why, because a lot of human geography has to be understood through the native language, right? Through the customs of the people that live in a place. That is very difficult to achieve from space, right? I would argue impossible, nearly impossible. So it requires the kind of what I would argue I told you don't go do, which is regional studies type of stuff. But it does require that, or a lived experience, right? Maybe you are from a place, maybe you studied abroad a place, maybe your family is from a place, you understand local customs, you might speak that language as a mother tongue, right? NGA hires that as well. so so hopefully I'm taking you on a tour of all things NGA, but great question on human geography. Maybe that was a friend of mine who just teed me up for that softball.
Very anonymous, but that's okay. We accept those too. I want to shift to Dick's question because we touched a little bit about St. Louis and NGA locations. So I'll just dive right into that. Given the chicken and egg of talent availability and economic development, at the present concentration of NGA staff and related GeoInt talent in Northern Virginia, your thoughts specifically on how St. Louis overall and NGA St. Louis can successfully ramp up the recruitment of GeoInt talent here in St. Louis in advance of what will be the opening of St. Louis HQ.
So Jermaine, so important, right? I would argue to this. Northern Virginia has no competitive advantage on St. Louis when it comes to the geospatial industry. There are other places in this country that do, right? Boston might, Silicon Valley might, but DC does not. What separates DC from St. Louis? Well, a couple thousand miles in a terribly different culture. Um, but I would argue that there's no reason why St. Louis cannot attract, right? I'm not from St. Louis. Why did I come here? One of the reasons I came here was because I was excited and I was invigorated by this sort of growing geospatial hub, this geospatial community that's here, right? I think a lot about the ag tech activity that's going on around here, right? Nothing to do with my job, right? But there is competitive advantage, and there are so many industries that use geospatial now. Right? There's no magic about the federal government. Most of our best hires aren't necessarily coming from some other federal group across the DC metro line. They might be coming out of college in Nebraska, right? Or Ohio State. There's all kinds of wonderful GIS programs that have nothing to do with DC. And the trick is bringing them here. And I would argue to you, NGA has a role to play here about offering exciting jobs right down the street here in North City, right? I like to believe that the people we want in federal service are the people who are energized about the work we do, right? And I would have moved to a lot of different places to do the work I do. And I hope we hire more people that really just want to do this work and would live on the surface of the sun if this is the kind of work they wanted to do. Simple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fantastic advice and a good time for a plug to to stay engaged with TaylorGeospatial.org, to follow TGI on LinkedIn and our socials, to follow Adam on LinkedIn. I think he's on that that social network as well. Just to stay informed about the events and activities going on as it relates to geospatial here in St. Louis. So 5 minutes left. We have 2 more questions. A little bit of the same. I think I know the answer to this one, but we'll kick it to you anyway. Opportunities at NGA for non-U.S. citizens, and if yes or no, what else could someone maybe transition to from the international market?
Yeah, look, that's a challenge. I will not sugarcoat that. And I will also say that I am not expert in what international individuals can and cannot do. I can say that they'll have a very difficult time, if not impossible time, working at NGA. However, I also believe that we have a lot of commercial partners that probably would be interested in your services, right? NGA is in a moment, if now, if never, where we understand the value of our commercial partners, right? And my hope is the best and brightest from around the world, if they can't work for NGA, they can work with one of our commercial partners to deliver some really bleeding edge technology or approaches or techniques that make my job and some of my teammates' jobs so much better, faster, stronger, easier, right? So it's a tough one to answer, because the answer is it's next to impossible that you would hire direct into NGA. Again, reserving judgment for our hiring professionals to correct me.
No, I think that's still helpful advice for those other opportunities as well. So
yeah.
One final anonymous question. If someone applies for a position with NGA, how flexible might NGA be with the idea that the applicant can learn the skills you mentioned after being hired? So onboarding types of skills, programs that NGA engages in with employees, a little bit about that maybe.
So we hire in specific work roles, right? And specific work roles have specific requirements that you need to meet to be competitive. Again, it's a competitive process. But I would also offer to you that I work with people who started in HR and became analysts, and I work with analysts who became communications professionals. I want to tell you, to get your foot in the door, take a job, make sure that you want to do the job. But once you're inside the network, right? And I would broaden that out to the intelligence community broadly cast. Once you are inside the intelligence community, there is plenty of opportunity to train, retrain. It requires time, and it requires persistence, and it requires patience. But it's absolutely viable. And I have friends who have done it, and I have colleagues that do it. And myself, right? I manage a lot of budget. I'm a marine scientist that did GIS, that became an analysis. Now I'm managing a large IT budget and portfolio. I'm not an IT professional, right? So what does all of that say? It says once you're in the building, once you're in the network, you're in the club, however you want to use that word, there's a lot of opportunity.
No, that's one great piece of advice to close up here, Adam. So we are really close to time, almost right there. I'm going to thank you, Adam, so much for sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences, for answering hard questions today from our participants. There were some good ones, some anonymous ones. Those are okay too. And thanks to the participants, a good, great, and engaged group of folks. And I hope you'll do this again with us next time. Scheduled Tailored Geospatial Career Guide Series set, I do believe, for January 25th. 2024. We'll have another geospatial professional joining us to talk with you about their experience, sharing their advice. Thank you so much for being with us today, Adam. And thanks for being a part of the community we're trying to build here at TGI. And we hope to see you all next month.
100%. Thanks for having me, Christopher. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for all the great questions.
I appreciate it. Take care, Adam.